Hi, my name is Luke, and this is my oral defense for my paper. My topic for my paper is intergenerational discipleship or intergenerational relationships help lead to a deeper and help foster a deeper intimacy with Christ. And the reason why I chose this topic is because I'm a young pastor. I started back in our church in September, and there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't know. There were a lot of things that school just weren't able to teach me. It's more practical information about being a pastor. And as I got in and I began to evaluate the different ministries and see the need of the ministries here of the church, I realized that there were many ministries that are being done well, but they were missing a very key concept. They were missing different generations serving together to reach the general mission of the church, which is to go out and to share with others, to show. And our church's mission is to share and to show the love of Jesus by making disciples. Yet we were not making disciples, and we were not bringing up younger people in discipleship to show and to share the love of Jesus. The senior adults focused on ministering with the senior adults. The young teenagers focused on ministering with the teenagers, married couples with married couples, and the young adults with the young adults, which I find very valuable to be separate and to be able to work in those manners. But also, if we are going to have an effective ministry of the church, we must be effective across generation. And that means coming together and putting aside the age differences or even the difference in thinking, but coming together and furthering the ministry of the gospel across our generations. The rational reason of why I chose this side of the topic is because, first, I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn more about what intergenerational disciples and what intergenerational relationships actually look like and how they can be more effective for the local church. But I also wanted to learn what was the best way in doing this so that we can implement these things in our local church. And if someone asks, Luke, how do you do these things and how did you get this to work in your church, I can just begin to show and to begin to tell them about how we went through this process, and it was due to creating relationships and looking up sources and finding these different information. Because I believe in my heart that intergenerational disciples and relationships are what drive the church. My mentor, who is much older than I am, poured into me so that I could be where I'm at today. My parents poured into me so that I could be at where I am today. And I could say the same thing as probably for you. You've had somebody in your life to encourage you or to lead you to go into the ministry, to go into a calling, or to further your education. And by doing so and by studying this topic, I believe it will help further the ministry of the church. A few of the major concepts that we had in this paper was first, how different generations different, how they are different from each other, and how they benefit one another. Because we know that the baby boomers are different than Gen A and the Gen Alpha. And when we think about intergenerational discipleships, we must first know what discipleship looks like. We must know what generations look like. So the first key concept was focusing on what generations look like and how they benefit one another. But also is, what is discipleship? What does biblical discipleship look like? And it's laying it out from the Gospels, but it's also laying it out from a practical standpoint within our churches. What does discipleship look like, and what is a disciple? And then the last key concept that I had was how to successfully integrate intergenerational disciples and discipleship within the church, and focusing on how can we better do these things, how can we better implement these ideas within our own local church. And a couple of key scholars in this debate, which can be difficult because you have so many different ideas of what discipleship looks like. You have so many different ideas on what discipleship actually is. But one of the main and key scholars that I can think of and that doing this research that really helped me, and this was Robbie Gallaty, we know that Mr. Gallaty, Dr. Gallaty, has a heart for discipleship, not only in his own church, but also in helping other churches with discipleship. So he was one of the key scholars in this debate in understanding what discipleship is and what generational discipleship looks like. When we think about some strengths from this paper, from what I could perceive, my strengths were first, going and figuring out a successful game plan for integrating discipleship within the church. But also, it's about studying what discipleship looks like. And even not even just discipleship across the generations, but what do actual different generations look like? And in learning and knowing how different generations think, and knowing how different generations act, it really helped me focus in on the ministry of the church, and knowing that to create a intergenerational discipleship and those relationships, we must be focused, and we must understand the different generations and how they work. Some of the weaknesses from this paper is first, finding opposition. It's very hard to find opposition against discipleship. Discipleship, we know as believers, are something that must be natural, and unfortunately in many of our churches it has not become something that is natural. But finding opposition against discipleship is difficult, but also finding this idea and open opposition against discipleship is difficult. But it's also difficult to find, for myself, to find successful examples of integrating intergenerational discipleship within the church, and finding those books and those sources. There's like specifications of grandparents with grandchildren, but it's not a broad understanding of intergenerational discipleship or intergenerational relationships. We go back to we may focus on parents and kids, or may focus on from one generation to the next, but it doesn't focus on from all the generations. Like here in our very own church, I have 5 generations present within the church, and it's very hard to find sources that allow us to go in and to really examine what a successful generational relationship and discipleship looks like. The difference and the impact of each generation is something that I learned about, that generations, they do play off of each other. And we can see that from our own lives, the way our parents walked with Christ, the way our grandparents walked with Christ, or the way our church members walked with Christ, by seeing them and seeing how they worship. It may be different than how we worship or how Gen Alpha worships. And it may be something that is abnormal for ourselves, but really what seemed to help me, and I learned in researching, is that the baby boomers and Gen Alpha, they both have something to present to us. They both have something to bring to the table. And learning more about those generations really helped me flesh out the idea of what generational relationships and discipleship looks like. But also, something that really helped me is finding and understanding what different methods of discipleship do, and how, even though they may be different, although they may look different, we all have the same goal in reaching others for Christ. And if there was something that I could do differently in this paper, it would be, I would try to do more work in finding secular sources, as well as just trying to do my best to find more precise information on generational discipleship. But I believe that this is something that may have been lacked, something that may have just been looked over. We have plenty of resources on discipleship, but it was really hard to find good and scholarly information on generational discipleship. So what I would have loved to do is spend a little more time looking in to secular sources of information on discipleship and intergenerational relationships, as well as finding more topics or more sources on actual generational ministry in the church. And there's one more thing I want to explain, and I should have done this at the beginning of the video, but what I want us to understand is that whenever I say intergenerational relationships, I also mean intergenerational discipleship. Christ commanded us to go and to be disciples. So if we're going to build relationships, people, we should first be relational. But we should also become disciples and make disciples in that process. So whenever I use the term intergenerational discipleship or intergenerational relationships, I am playing off the same idea, because to be called to be a disciple is to call to make relationships with others. So I thank you for listening. Look forward to hearing your information off this paper. Thank you. God bless.